what changed for you? You mentioned 20 years. You're only doing 2 chapters. You're going over the chapters. You're not finishing anything. What changed and why?
So the stuff that I was writing, I didn't love, and it wasn't until I started critiquing books and going to conferences and interviewing authors. I was doing a lot of, but you've combined your writing career with a career of being fascinated by publishing and writers and the way you blog about writing and elevate other people. I was doing the same thing, except I hadn't figured out how to write my own books yet. And just spending time around people who are writing, I realized that they weren't much different from me. They had the same kind of background. They weren't special in a way that I thought writers were special. And it was really important for me to learn that, like, the writer who inspired me to even think about writing as a 12-year-old was Orson Scott Card, only because I read in the back of the book that he was from North Carolina, which is where I was from. And before I read that, I didn't know that there could be writers from North Carolina. I'm just a young kid and living in the country. And so, I don't know, learning that writers aren't these perfect people, and they're just, it's a grind. What they do is a grind. Made me approach writing my first book very differently, the first one that I completed. And I'd learned enough through interviewing that they, give me advice for someone who wants to write. And I was asking it for myself and pretending like I was asking it for the actual, website I was writing for. But I was asking it for myself. And they would always say, like, just write to the end, write rough. Don't worry about the quality, just get your draft down. And I heard that advice over and over again. And that let me stop taking myself to task for the quality I was seeing on my screen as I was writing. And that's still the thing that I tell writers when they ask me, like, how do I can write my first novel? And I'm like, the only goal is to write that last chapter. Like, whatever you have to do to get to that last chapter, even if it's like, and something happens here, and the next chapter, and something happens here, and then you get to the last chapter and you write the last chapter, now you've got a book. It's just, really rough draft. There's not much meat on the bones, and now you got a lot to fill in, but now you know your story, you know where it's going to end, and you can start filling things in. And that's the roughest way to write a rough draft and revise into a novel. I don't recommend it, but I did this myself, and I see a lot of writers do this. You write the first few chapters, and then it feels easier to revise than it does to write more new stuff. So you just go back to the beginning and keep trying to make this first sentence better, and make that first paragraph, the first page better and better and better, and you just revise it until it's mush. And that first page is eventually going to be the most important thing you'll ever write. But to get the novel completed, the last page is the most important thing to have as your goal. And whatever it takes to get there, you just have to have this single-minded pursuit of writing the end. And when you get there, if what you have is just garbage, that's okay. Now you've got something you can work with, and I had to figure that out for myself. And now it's something I try to impart to other people who are having the same struggles that I had.
So first draft takes you on average how long then?
It's gotten longer. The longer I write, the longer it takes me to write my first draft. The first book I ever wrote, I wrote the rough draft in 7 days. And it was about 75,000 words in 7 days. And I know I wasn't working. I just stopped doing.
I'm on a podcast. My eyes are bugging out of my head.
I hate to admit it. I've taken myself. I used to take myself a little more seriously, or try to like fake it like I knew what I was doing as a writer. So I would not tell people that, because it makes it sound like, well, you must have written complete garbage. It was some of the best stuff I ever wrote. And I find that when I'm writing like 5,000 words in a day, that's the stuff that almost needs no editing, because you're just locked in the story. You're seeing it cinematically and just describing what's going on. You're not like stopping to, read an email or, do a chore and come back and get into the flow. You're just like, just totally in the flow. So I was writing about 12 to 14 hours a day for that week, and was so excited with the story and just could not get enough of it. It was like reading a book that you can't put down, like a literal page turner. And so, I couldn't stop. And a weekend I had 75,000 words. another week of revising, it padded out to about 100,000. And I was looking at a novel that made sense, had good characters, that I loved the storyline, and I couldn't believe it. It was a dream I'd had my whole life, a bucket list of any bucket list I've ever had. Writing a novel is at the very top. And 32 years old, I'd finally done it. And then I was so excited, like nothing else mattered. I wasn't thinking about publishing. I wasn't thinking about becoming a writer. I was just like ecstatic that I'd written a book. And I printed it out at Kinko's, like had this big stack of paper, sent it to my mom. We went out to dinner that night and I had it on a thumb drive. I made copies of it everywhere, emailed it to everybody just because I was terrified that it was going to disappear. And we're sitting at dinner and it's just on a thumb drive on the dinner table. And it's my sister, a girlfriend, and me and my mom, and we're having dinner. And I just couldn't stop thinking in my head, like, oh my God, I've written a book. I've written a book. Like, you just feel quantitatively different in that moment when you realize, I didn't feel like an author, but I felt like someone who'd written a book that actually made sense. And that was a very vivid feeling. There's even, on the way back home, because I was out of town when I put the last polish on it that end of that second week. On the way home, we were driving through for fast food, and I had this impulse to tell the person in the fast food line that I'd written a novel. And I didn't say it, but like it was in my head. Like I just felt like no one could ever look at me and think I'd written a book. And it was so part of this like pride in my chest at the moment that I just wanted to like have it tattooed on my forehead. That's how it felt. And ever since then, I've just been addicted to that feeling of bringing worlds that don't exist, like creating them, and then finding out that other people want to join you in them and live in them and talk about the characters that you made up. It's just so surreal. And I love it and have never stopped appreciating that feeling.